Good evening and welcome to Talking Point. I'm your host, Dr. Corey Wright, coming to you live from the studios of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation in Accra. Talking Point comes to you live this and every Sunday, and we engage with you on issues of national concern and have discussions to help you make informed decision making. We are streaming live on GBC Ghana Online, on Facebook at Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, and as always we welcome those listening to us on Unique 95.7. The 2021 WASSCE results were released last week, and though there was an overall improvement over past year's results, which we have all lauded, results of the leaked papers during the examinations and cancelled or withheld papers after the release of the results continue to affect the overall perception of the integrity of the process. Tonight, our panelists are going to help us examine the 2021 WASSCE results, talk about comparisons from previous years, and also discuss matters arising. We encourage you to join in the discussion by sending your messages during the show to our WhatsApp number 055-744-6429. Our panelists tonight are on my far left, Mr. Peter Antipate. He's the Executive Director of the Institute for Educational Studies, IFEST. Next to him is Mr. Kwesi Kwateng. He's the PRO for the Ministry of Education. And we are hoping that we'll have via Zoom tonight Mr. Kofi Asari, Executive Director of the Africa Education Watch. So let me start with you, Mr. Pate. So the results came out, and I know we're going to delve into all the particulars, but what are your general assessments of the results so far?
All right, thank you and good evening to your viewers and listeners. I think that this year, as compared to last year, there seems to be an improvement over the past 6 years. So if you look at the results starting from 2016, you see that gradually there are considerable improvements that have been recorded over the years, of course, because we are focusing on the core subjects. So that is what we are talking about. And you also realize, as WAEC indicated, that there was a little dip in English and mathematics, yes. And then students performed better in integrated science and social studies. But in all, we want to say that there is a considerable improvement in the performance. Although that is at the general level, I mean that is at the macro level. Therefore, one would want to do a more detailed analysis and break it down to the regional, district, and individual schools. Then you might have a clear picture of what is actually happening on the ground. Okay, so we'll probably come to that later. So, Mr. Kwateng, what about you? What is your, or the ministry's general assessment of the results?
Okay, thank you very much, and a very good evening to my colleague Peter here. Yesterday I was on the show with you, so...
Oh, really?
We see you here.
Well, today I'm your friend.
Yeah, yesterday he wasn't my friend. You don't affiliate with someone, blood. Okay, so, back to the substantive issue. So if you look at the WASSCE results, clearly, like Peter has said, the data, especially if you compare for the past 7 years, you've seen a steady increase, and you can call that an improvement. Because you realize that for the past 7 years, especially the latter 4 years, you see that at least you have about averagely over 50% of students getting A1 to C6. And this means that, they pass the core subjects. And of course, as you pass the core subjects, the system that we have been using is that students will have the opportunity to also have education up to the tertiary level. Within the context that we have been talking about, the fact that we have to increase our gross enrollment ratio, which currently stands at 18.8%. And of course, we have always been comparing ourselves within the rest of the sub-Saharan continent, countries within, and we pat our backs and laugh and be happy. But that is, if you compare to the rest of other countries like Singapore, it's around 40%, Botswana 40%, if you go to America around 75%, clearly we are lacking behind. And so access is very key, and access certainly will not come from a vacuum. It requires that you put critical intervention so that you get majority of your students passing. And of course, passing well, so that especially within the framework of the core subjects, so that they will be able to get access to the various universities. Okay. Again, it's also instructive to also mention that if you look at the data analysis, for instance, if you look at the 2020 and 2021, for instance, you realize that averagely 60% of students have passed in their core subjects, which is also something significant. But of course, there are some, I mean, certainly that will still need to improve. Of course, like Peter said, if you look at English and mathematics, for instance, there was some marginal drop. And that, like the minister said on the floor of Parliament, calls for immediate investigation so that whatever intervention, whatever resource allocation we can do as a ministry, do that as soon as possible.
Okay.
Interestingly, if you look at social studies and integrated science, there was also a marginal increase if you compare to that of last year. So it's on the balance, I mean, students have done well, especially writing exams in the COVID environment. I think it's something that is commendable, but of course we need to do more.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Asari, are you with us? I wanted to ask you what your general assessments were. Okay, we'll move on. Okay, so what I want to ask you, Mr. Pate, is you were talking about drilling down. So I look at the math scores, which are, according to WASSCE, 65% last year, which was supposed to have been the highest ever. And this year, like you said, the minister is a bit concerned about it, went down to 54%. English was a marginal decrease at 257 last year to 54 this year. But the integrated sciences and the social sciences, we seem to have done quite well. Well, at least in the integrated sciences, from 52% last year to 65% this year. And social studies, 64% last year to 66% this year. When you drill down to the regional levels, what are you seeing?
All right, so this is a provisional result. I mean, 2021, that's a provisional result, and we are here to do the analysis because WAEC have not released all the results. But what you would want to do is to look at how the performance was last year, and then you understand what we mean when we say that you have to go down and look at the results. So if you look at the averages in last year compared to last year performance, if you take a region like the Ahafo region, for example, you will see that the integrated science, the pass rate was 92.3% as compared to the national average. It means that in that particular region, students did very well when it comes to the integrated science. But if you take a region like Northeast region, the same integrated science, the pass rate was 14.3%. 14.3%. Mathematics was 21%, English was 5.1%, and then social studies was 31.5%. Now, what this tells us is that if we are so much satisfied with the performance of the students on the average at the national level, which was English 57, Maths 65.7, Science 52, and 64, social studies, then we should be very much concerned with what is really happening in some of these regions, like I've just shown you. So you do not have to make a general statement, and that's why sometimes when we are engaging policymakers, we try to tell them that when the results come, they should not be in a haste to jump into conclusions and ascribe certain reasons to why students are performing, because when you drill down the results, you see that there are serious performance disparities across the regions. And if this is just a regional breakdown, there are certain schools that scored 0% in the core subject. This calls for a more targeted and in-depth approach in dealing with some of these things. So for us, we are not so much interested in the macro level, because that is always that always looks good if you look at the trend of analysis. But when you want to do a proper analysis for policy intervention purposes, you would want to focus more on the regional district and then the school-based results.
So I'll let you answer that, but I want to go. Mr. Asari is on the phone. So, Mr. Asari, good evening. How are you?
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening to your cherished audience.
I just wanted to ask you, so the results, the provisional results, I should say, are out. What was your general assessment of the results that you've seen so far, comparatively?
Compared to last year, I think generally the results were good, except that we reduced in terms of quality in mathematics. And so comparatively, they were good, but then in mathematics performance reduced. Compared to the target in the education strategic plan, we met all targets except the target for English. So it means that compared to last year, there were issues with mathematics. Compared to our target in the education strategic plan, we met all three targets, but we did not meet the target on English. It means that we still have issues with math and English. Compared to 2019, in 2019, English was doing about 65%. It has, mathematics was doing about 55%. This has reduced to 45. This is 20 percentage points. Sorry. This has reached 54. Sorry, 54. So that is about 11 percentage points decline. This must be some sort of worry. But compared to last year, these results generally are good. But let me say this, that there are three significant things about WASSCE 2021, which every analysis must consider. The first is that for the second time, back to back, for the second time, at least 50% of candidates scored between A1 and C6 in the 4 core. That is significant and commendable. Second, for the first time, we had very commercialized levels of examination fraud, where questions were sold on various social media platforms, like the way we buy tomatoes on the market. It was so embarrassing that it was very embarrassing. Everybody was concerned, and for the first time, which was a positive, the Minister of Education come to concede that these issues are disturbing, and for that matter, the ministry was taking certain measures to curb the rising incidence of examination fraud and examination malpractice. And the third significant issue is that for the first time in many years, we are seeing releasing results and withholding subject results of 20%, the total number of schools that wrote the exam, 20%. About 20% of the schools that wrote the exam will not have specific subject results because of investigations into allegations or suspicions of examination fraud. This is different from the 3,000 that have entire results withheld. That this is different. And on the issue of the 3,000 entire results withheld, last year, even though we reported various degrees of malpractices through the sale of questions on Telegram platforms, we saw a lesser number of people's results being withheld. But this year, we are seeing an increase in the number of results withheld, entire results withheld, by 950%, which in sum should tell us that the magnitude and the levels of examination fraud, that is the leakage of question papers, and examination malpractice, that is the collusion between students, some school authorities, invigilators and supervisors, reach a very high level, which must concern everyone who is minded about something within our educational system.
Okay.
These three things are significant.
Okay, thank you for your submission. So, Mr. Kwarteng, I just wanted to piggyback on what Mr. Asari said regarding the digital things. There was a statement made by the WAEC PRO, I think. Digital dishonesty has become a threat to all examination boards globally. The Council has engaged the security agencies, National Security, BNI, and CID, and provided them with a list of names and phone numbers by which some of these rogue websites and WhatsApp group operate. And it goes on to say that they're working closely with the security agents who have ensured them that they are tracking the perpetrators. How pervasive is this issue? And of course, I know you want to respond to some of the things that Peter said earlier. So
we may have to start with the issues raised by Kofi Asari.
Okay.
Then I quickly, I'm here inside the studio, so you won't run away. We'll address it. I think Kofi has raised very substantive issues. Of course, I mean, issues about examination malpractices and perceptions about leakages and other things has been a systemic problem. I'm sure this is not the first time that you are hearing it. Those times where I mean, we're writing SSC and other things. I mean, these were issues that as an educational system we're battling with. It does not also mean that as a ministry or probably as an agency, we should not respond to those challenges. But I will also restrain myself, and of course will disagree with anybody who tries to some way, somehow assume or imply that because there are perceptions of examination leakage and malpractice, then it discredits the entire resource absolutely or in absolute terms. Because I mean, the question is that those previous years where students were also not performing, certainly those exams were not also immune to examination malpractices. So when we are having such conversations, I think the context is also should be very important. That so for me, yes, issues of examination malpractices has always been there. We talk about linkages, we talk about the malpractices itself, and of course, I mean, if you look at, for instance, some of these who alleged leakages, most of them are these rogue individuals, fraudsters who may want to trick the students for their monies and other things, of course, with promises of giving them past questions. If you recall, for instance, 2020, it was rumored that 2020, how do you call it, the integrated science paper has leaked and it was flying on social media. But it turned out that what was written was entirely different. So sometimes you may also have to separate the perceptions and the speculations from the reality. Because yes, you have people who are able to predict, and of course, based on the curriculum and the syllables, are able to say that, for instance, when I was in Congo Master Senior High School, I knew that biology we could have reproductive system because it's in the syllables. So I could predict. I knew that we could have something osmosis. If you go to chemistry, titration was something that we could have. And so you could just look based on the syllables and predict. So if you have rogue individuals probably taking advantage of such a system and then promising students, and of course we see those things on social media, that shouldn't be construed as discrediting the entire results. I mean, we have our students who has stood the test of time in the midst of COVID, has able to, I mean, get these significant results. I'm not sure we should just run it there entirely.
So if I may, there was a report done in 2019. I'm not quite sure people are trying to discredit the entire process, but it was 2009 or in 2013. It says examination should be reliable and consistent as a means of measuring students' achievement. However, when irregularities or examination malpractice occurs, then the validity and resulting outcomes become questionable. To this end, WASSCE 2006 concluded that examination malpractice is an unethical act because it encourages mediocrity in the sense that students who succeed through unorthodox methods may be rated equal to those who struggle on their own to excel. So I'm not quite sure everybody is saying that, you know, this discredits everything as a blanket statement.
2006.
In 2013,
so even in 2000,
yes. So the situation, there are three quotes in there. One was from 2009, 2013, and 2006.
So, I mean, if I affirm the position that I'm making, that this thing has been with us, it's been a systemic problem.
But the issue is that the system, because it has been a systemic problem and not a one-off, then you tend to actually erode confidence. And that's where we all have to work together to strengthen
Is there
that.
more reason why this time around the Minister for Education, Dr. Odichum, has said that, no, we are not going to sweep it under the carpet. What we are going to do is that we are going to engage it and tackle it head on. Remember, he proposed serialization. That, I mean, every process where you have a lot of human interface in it, certainly you will have, because for me, cheating is a social issue that has found its way in education. I mean, that's how I say it, because in marriages you have people cheating, in business you have people cheating, and what have you. And some way, somehow, it also found itself in the educational system, because especially even look at the system that we run, where we train students just to go and answer exams instead of training students to be critical thinkers, assertive and problem solvers. It's the more reason why we are responding with this new curriculum, which is not entirely exams based, but it looks at training students who are critical thinkers, assertive and problem solvers. So yes, the problem is there. We admit that, I mean, issues of leakages, I mean, especially there are results that were cancelled, which means that some way, somehow, it confirms the case of malpractice that is possible. For instance, if students enter the exam hall, is able to sneak with his phone and take a picture of it. While the students is in the hall, the questions will be flying on social media. It can be construed as a leakage, which may not necessarily be so, but it's a malpractice. And when it happens like that, WASSCE takes that bold step, and yes, to sometimes cancel the results.
By doing all all these good
yes.
you become your own worst
Yeah,
enemy.
exactly.
Yes.
But for me, the way to go is what the minister has proposed, that in the short term, let's serialize the question. Serialization means that you have about 20 or 10 different set of questions. So the incentive for even students to cheat or probably go after these rogue individuals and get questions or pay will be low, because at the end of the day, you do not even know which of the questions that you are going to answer. Okay. So you have about 20 different set of questions that you are exposed to.
All right, let me go to you, Mr. Pate. I wanted to actually talk about Professor Kwesi Yankah, the former Minister of State in charge of education. He recently launched a book called Beyond the Political Spider: Critical Issues in African Humanities. And in his book, he has a chapter on Sciences Speak, Humanities React, or Humanities Answer. And in there, he dealt with the phobia many people have of mathematics and science, which may account for, or not may, does account for some of the disparities that we see. But what he also does, which was extremely fascinating, was that he traced the WASSCE or WASSCE results from 2006 to 2019. And his goal was to discuss the implications, fluctuations, and policy interventions that have led to the ups and downs. So I know you have a lot of statistics that you typically refer to, and you may not have necessarily read what Professor Yankah had written, but what are your thoughts and impressions about some of these interventions, implications of them, the fluctuations, and that have led to some of these ups and downs that we may have seen?
Okay, so if you read the literature, you would realize that there are a lot of factors that affect the students' performance in terms of whether they do well in the exams or they will not do well in the exams. There are a lot of factors that even contribute to students wanting to go in for external support. So every year you will realize that the trend has been up and down from 2000 to 2020. The trend has been up and down. There are years that students perform very well in one or two of the core subjects, and there are years that students do not perform very well in one or two of the core subjects. The focus for us especially is that what happens to those who do not get the opportunity to enter into the tertiary study, because technically if you look at WASSCE, SSC changing to WASSCE, it's more of like a matriculation examination that enables others to move into a tertiary institution. But when we were designing our educational structure, we did it in such a way that when you finish WASSCE, it is also an exit exam. An exit exam in such a way that you enter the world of work. And that is where the problem is. So whilst a lot of people are not able to graduate into tertiary institutions, these people do not also find themselves in the world of work. The way we structured our system has made it very difficult for them to even find their feet. So you see them going back to write remedials for a longer period of time. That is why some of us, we are thinking that it is time that we have to look at what happens to those who do not pass the exams. And this year we are having 40% of them not going into tertiary institution. Last year it was 40%. The previous year it was almost 45%. Now these students are left behind, and if you want to track it from 2000, you will see that every year we are having almost 30 to 40% of our students not able to enter tertiary institutions. So we need to sit down and have a general look at it. We are thinking that WASSCE should be what it is: tertiary education entrance examination, and that is clearly what it is. But the child who sits in the Ghanaian education system for 14 good years, primary 6, 3 JHS, 3 SHS, should not be cut off because he sat for an examination which is 2 hours, which my brother Kofi Asare is even saying that some get help from somewhere, which yeah, that child's life should not be cut off because he sat for an examination which is 2 hours. And he F9, E8, D7, nobody would want to even employ in the world of work as we envisage in our educational structure. So we need to look at it. When we are able to do that, it will reduce the pressure on the WASSCE certificate. It is because people fear that if they don't pass WASSCE, their lives have ended. So they will then find ways and means to get questions, and then the examination malpractice will continue to increase. But when they know that they can leave the system, get into apprenticeship, do something small here, do something small here, and then find themselves back into the formal education system by doing a 6 months course in marketing, 6 months course in whatever it is, this will be able to help us reduce examination malpractice and also take care of those who have not been able to enter the tertiary institution. So when I look at the results over the years, that is what normally comes to mind, and we are pushing this strongly that we need to have something like that.
So, Mr. Sari, I know that your office has talked a lot about the examinations malpractice. I think what we are trying to do is move past the identification of the problem to figure out how we can solve the problem. So in your research, have you come out with any ways in which we could curb this examinations malpractice? Any ideas, any solutions that you could share?
Yes, indeed we have. We've made about 10 proposals to government. The key ones are to digitize the question transmission system. At present, questions are transmitted from Accra to the depots, to the schools, manually. And the printing process too is another manual process where questions could possibly leak. So throughout the value chain, we have recommended that there must be an effort to digitize the processes. When we digitize the processes, you remove the human element involved so that you can have printers installed in every senior high school. A command is issued in Accra, and within 5 minutes, questions are printed so that you don't have to print papers days or a week before the paper for them to leak. That is one of the key recommendations we have made to end the leakage of question papers. Apart from that, we have suggested to the ministry that the nature and the architecture of WAEC does not support a system where WAEC is accountable enough. There is a very tricky situation here, and listen to it very well. WAEC is an external examiner. Their job is to assess the work of the genius, because the genius has the function of teaching students and ensuring that they pass and pass well. We have a situation where the head of genius sits on the WAEC board as a vice chair. This arrangement is incongruous, okay, because even when there is more practice, how can a genius admit? They will always defend WAEC and pretend nothing is happening. And the more you pretend nothing is happening, the more the problem continues to exist and benefit those who pretend there is no problem. So we have recommended to government that the genius should not be allowed to sit on the WAEC board because it is potentially a conflicting situation, because it is in their interest for every student to pass. Because the WASSCE result is actually a test of the genius's competence, including the Director General and all his staff. But so these are some of the things that we have raised that government will have to consider. Apart from that, we need to move from the situation where we see WASSCE as a firing squad. If you don't pass, you are doomed. We need to begin to depart from that and create other avenues where people who do not pass WASSCE do not become useless. As at now, 45% of our students who did not pass mathematics obviously cannot progress tertiary. And we are talking of about 200,000. Now, what are we going to do with them? In the normal scheme of things, there's a huge media market where you are going to be exposed to private institutions, charge up to 5,000 cedis just for about 1 or 2 courses research. How many parents can afford this? Especially in mind the fact that the distribution of the result is skewed against rural districts where there is poverty. So we need to create other channels within our secondary education system where the fact that you don't pass mathematics doesn't mean that you are doomed. That will reduce the edge on parents and students to cheat, because in order to cheat, parents are buying phones for their children, and they are using it to tap onto social media handles and then buy these questions. In addition to all this, we need to understand that teachers play a key role in preventing examination malpractice. Teachers are the invigilators. The lead invigilator in the school is the assistant headmaster or the headmaster. They are all part of the system. If you have a system where teachers who participate in invigilation fraud are just reprimanded, then there won't be any deterrence. As of now, WAEC has released the results. Have you heard of WAEC releasing the list of any persons found to have been culpable for colluding with students? No. But we have seen 197 schools' results being withheld in certificates. What about the teachers who are responsible for supervising the students or invigilating the students in these 197 schools? What about the invigilators in the 3,000 or so, in the schools of the 3,000 plus students who have had their entire results withheld? What about the invigilators in the schools that, in all this, there are lots of people in the value chain whose actions and inactions continue to promote more practices in the examination room, but there is no accountability. A teacher is only giving a reprimand, and that's all. So we need to criminalize examination practice and criminalize examination fraud and begin to openly punish teachers, invigilators, WASSCE officials, policemen who are involved in the collusion, so that when the punishment is publicized, people will now see that you won't only be punished, but you will also be disgraced if you support or participate or condone in examination fraud or examination fraud malpractice, especially in the WASSCE office, where questions are leaking from their printing out. No one is ever held responsible. So we have said that the final solution is that an external body should be mandated to investigate WASSCE. But WASSCE has investigated itself for the past 50 years, and that investigation has led to what we are seeing today. They have not been guilty. All the time, it is someone else being guilty. So when we have an external body investigating WASSCE, we will get to know from which source questions leaked in this year's WASSCE. And let me conclude by saying that when the Minister of Education stamped his foot down and took some drastic measures, we saw the the BNI, take over the printing and distribution of the BECU questions this year. Did you hear of educating the BECU questions? No. All the platforms that were selling the BECU questions, we were engaging on the platform. We were monitoring them. No one had any questions. All the questions were fake.
Sorry.
Something with that WASSCE cannot solve. Only an external intervention can come in and resolve.
Right,
so the final one is that the external investigation to investigate the cause of the leakage at WASSCE will have to be undertaken so that persons responsible punish severely. Okay. Then it will not get in.
Well, what I was going to say was that the good news is that, as I had read earlier, that the Council had engaged security agencies from the National Security, BNI, and CID, and they've given them a list of names and phone numbers. So maybe we'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they want to be sure that these people are the ones engaging in this act before they go ahead and make the public announcement. But we have to take a quick break. This is Talking Point. We'll be right back. If you're just joining us, this is Talking Point, and tonight's discussion is on the 2021 WASSCE results. Dr. Enibright, and my guest in the studio tonight on my far left, Mr. Peter Antipate. He's the Executive Director of the Institute for Educational Studies, IFEST. Next to him is Mr. Kwesi Kwarteng. He's a PRO for the Ministry of Education. And we have on the phone, I'm not sure if he's still with us, Mr. Kofi Asare, Executive Director of the Africa Education Watch. So, Mr. Kwarteng, before we left, Mr. Asare was talking a lot about all the issues related to examinations malpractice, and I wanted to know if you wanted to have a chance to comment on that before we moved on.
I think with the concerns about examination malpractices, I even spoke about the minister's intervention to addressing the problem. But this is my concern. I think it shouldn't always be the case that probably always when our students pass exams, some way, somehow, we must read meanings into it and probably be looking at whether or not examination malpractices might have influence their success in their exams. I'm not sure the expectation was that we wanted our students to fail, so that we will know that, well, the system is rather working. I'm not sure that was the expectation. there has been critical interventions that might have caused this thing. And it's clear, first of all, if you remove the barrier of access for students, I mean, there was this artificial barrier of access, and then you realize that the free SHS policy came in and increased enrollment from 880,000 to 1.2 million. Peter here was talking about the fact that if you go to deprived communities and other regions, I mean, students, the pass rate is low. But these were people that ordinarily were even denied of the first variable in education, which is access, before you even come to quality. And so some way, somehow, intervention has been provided. And so cumulatively, it adds up to the results that we are seeing. Students have been given accommodation. Students will not have to be worrying about paying accommodation. There is free meal for students, for both day and boarding students, clothing, provision of core textbooks to students this time around. And so it's never been happening before, where students have access to core textbooks. You train teachers that are teaching the core subjects. You provide bursaries to girl students. Even that phenomenal game changer of the double track, where it resulted in reduced class size, you have what it translates into, of course, having a lower teacher to student ratio. What it means is that the teacher is able to have more contact hours with the students. I mean, these are all some of the critical interventions that affected the results that we are seeing. Of course, if you look at the trends, especially within the context of 2020 to 2021. So for me, yes, we can have a conversation about exam leakages. We can have a conversation about exam practices and the fact that we need to do well to strengthen the integrity and the credibility of the exam that we have. Yes, that is a conversation that we can all have. But for me, when it is made to look, and then the linkage is as though as soon as students pass, we must necessarily find fault and then try to impugn assumptions, especially when, as of now, there is no evidence to back that. I mean, there was more practices in the exams results. I mean, so we should be slow in making such conclusions.
Okay. So, Mr. Party, I'm going to move into another area, which is still about the examinations, but, you know, we have free SHS. I'm just curious. I don't know if your statistics will tell us this. Many times, if parents have a choice to train or educate a male or a female, they choose the male. So now that we've opened it up, I see the statistics for this year, but I'm curious if you have those, or maybe Mr. Kwarting you do, or Mr. Asare, what the statistics over the years have shown and how much of an impact free SHS is having on the girl-child education.
Okay, thank you very much. I think my brother wanted to go to the level that Kofi was also going. I'm happy that
I wanted to bring Kofi back.
I'm happy that you asked this question because free SHS is doing well. Seriously, if I always say that if you want to evaluate the impact of free SHS on our education, you just limit yourself to the objectives of the policy, which is access, equity, and quality. So in terms of access, enrollment has increased. If you look at the data from 2016 to now, there's been a considerable number of students that have gained access to senior high school. So that is something that is worth noting. If you look at equity, issues like gender parity ratio, as you were saying, a lot of girls are getting access. It used to be 1:1, 0.8, 0.7. Now it is 1:1.1. I was at a program where people were saying that now the focus is so much on the girl child that the boy child is being left behind. It shows.
It's a concern.
Because you know, in our system, if you have a daughter and you have a son and you are restrained financially, you want to put your bet on the son and ask the daughter to. But now, because of the removal of that barrier, financial barrier, everybody has got access to it. And because you know our population more females than males, it shows in the data that gender parity ratio have improved. Again, if you look at equity also in terms of access to a certain class of secondary education, with the help of the computer placement system, you will see that because of free SHS, you will see this kind of students who either will not have had access to some of these first class or category A schools now getting access to that. So the impact is clear. It's clear. It's there for us to see. But when it comes to quality, I always ask, or I always tell my friends to take it slowly. It's simply because, see, if you talk about quality, you're looking at output and then outcome. Output is what the academic performance shows. Now, you did in research, you do, if you are doing experimental research, you give a treatment, and the treatment, you have a control group. Unfortunately, free SHS, you don't have a control group. So you have all students in Ghana benefiting from free SHS, which means that if the policy is working, there should be improvement in all schools at the same time. That is not what is happening. So if you want to ascribe the performance of students to the free SHS and the policy interventions under free SHS, you should hasten slowly. Because if you look at a district like Adanse, the district scored less marks last year as compared to this year. These students were also enjoying free SHS. Are you going to say that the free SHS now works in certain schools and doesn't work in certain schools? That's why, from the research point of view, I will tell you that there are certain factors that always affect student performance. And politicians should not jump into the system and say that it is because of A or B. Let's go and do the research and find out what is really happening on the ground. It's the same with the double track. Perfect idea in terms of access, in terms of quality input variables like teacher to student ratio, student to classroom ratio, perfect. But if you want to say that students pass because of double track, I ask you a simple question. Let's list all the schools that did double track, and let's take the schools that didn't do double track. Let's look at the results. Can we say for sure that the schools that did double track performed better than the schools that didn't do double track? This is the kind of analysis that we need to do as an educational sector, so that when you step out and you are making some of these assertions, we will agree with you. It's the same with examination malpractice. I'll ask my brother Kofi, the schools that have been listed as being engaged in examination malpractice, can we do an analysis of their results and see that because they engage in examination malpractice, their results are relatively better than those who were not brought up at all? So these are the analysis that we need to do, so that we will not be jumping into conclusions that are not scientifically supported.
All right, so Mr. Asare, if you're still with me, maybe I'll ask you one final question. Mr. Parter was talking about the quality in some of the deprived communities. Have you done any research on that, and what are you seeing if you have?
Well, let me first indicate that it is not a debate that the free senior high school has been impactful. Okay, it's not a debate at all. It has been impactful positively, you know. But then anyone who says that the free senior high school is the reason why people are passing WASSCE this year is obviously a politician, not a technocrat. Yeah, a lot of things go into passing admission. Before free senior high school came, there were secondary schools in Ghana. There were teachers in the secondary schools. You know, most of the interventions taking place in the schools, the quality interventions through the secondary education improvement program, for instance, existed before the free senior high school. SEIP started before free senior high school started. So there are a lot of things that go into quality and then, you know, learning outcomes. It's not just a free senior high school. But the fact that the free senior high school is having a positive impact on our secondary education system is not a debate to be had. Let me quickly say that the last analysis we did, you know, of the distribution of WASSCE results, it was in 2019. And in 2019, we found that, for example, in the Upper West region, you know, that's the school, the highest pass rate was about 0.9%. No one didn't score 1% in that region. In the 5 Northern region, we found out that about 70 to 80% of the schools were scoring a maximum of 2%. This was more than the national level. We were doing about 48%. So we have, and this was after 2 years of implementing the free senior high school. So we are always minded that quality, so far as we are concerned, even though it's a problem, the issue about quality mainly is the distribution of quality. The quality we have is distribution. That's always been skewed in favor of urban. If you look at a district like Zamzugu, Zamzugu is still doing 0.2% in WASSCE pass rate. They are doing 1.97 in BEC pass rate. There is a direct correlation between the BEC pass rate, even from this deprived district, and the WASSCE pass rate. Because you won't go and learn how to speak English in senior high school. You won't go and learn how to do mathematics in senior high school. Those are foundational skills learned at the basics. So if they are deficient at the basic level, definitely you will be importing them to WASSCE, and then they will be doing too well. So I think that moving forward, all we need to do is that if we do a school-by-school analysis of this, we will see that in the districts where we don't have adequate teachers in the basic school, in the districts where there are no textbooks, in the districts where there are no classrooms, there are class measures, You go to Qantas South, you go to Kratche, you go to Damsibu, you go to Kiri East. In schools that class merge, in districts that class merges are a common feature, let us focus on identifying how the schools in these areas perform, and we will get direct correlation between the BEC result and then the WASSCE result. Then we zero down and provide specific quality improvement interventions, not at the secondary level, basic level. Because I'm saying, you don't learn how to speak and write English in secondary schools. Those are foundational skills that are supposed to be acquired at the basic level, but because of the level of education, basic schools, especially in the 5 rural districts, what happens is that they have the poorest of learning outcomes. So some having about 2% proficiency levels in math and English. That is how we can holistically view the WASSCE report and then improve upon the equitable distribution of the results at the national level.
Good. I wanted to come to you, Mr. Kwatem, because you mentioned some of the free amenities, the free textbooks, the free uniforms, the free meals. And I know sometimes people maybe try to travelize those things, but the free meals especially, even in some of the developed countries, people are seeing that children need, there are some children who come to school without meals, and the school needs to take care of them while they are there to put them in the right frame of mind to be able to study. So I think to some of the points that they were making, I think it would also be important for us to measure some of those, the impact of some of those amenities on the children and their frame of mind and their ability to be able to focus and study while they're in school. But I also wanted to ask you about the question about the quality in deprived communities, because these are communities that are already hard to reach, and in every show we do, whether it's hospital, police, we find that those communities are really engendered in terms of us not being able to provide them with the full resources. So what kinds of interventions or ideas or solutions are you guys thinking about to be able to provide them, if we are talking about equitable distribution? How do you think that can be achieved?
Thank you once again. I think if you listen to the line of debate, this conversation, where it's clear that students have done well, and of course we need to acknowledge that, then we refuse to use the percentages. On the other side, we may want to bring in the nominal figures and tend to suggest that that matters even more than the percentage when you want to look at the overall or the average of students that pass. I think that balance also needs to be set right, while we do not jettison one standard ahead of the other, because at the end of the day, generally, we measure the performance of students based on that. But of course, I mean, the points that they've raised is also very important on the issue of quality. And I've always insisted, like the Honorable Minister for Education will tell you, that when you talk about education, it's premised on 3 key variables, and they are all, or they all complement each other. I mean, talk about, first of all, access, which we've demonstrated that, I mean, the free SHS policy has really increased access. Then you have to move on to quality, and of course, I mean, access and quality will have to have relevance on the socio-economic transformation. Other than that, there is no basis of the education system, or you can't say that the education system is not working. If you have an educational system where consistently, I mean, within the past 4 years, you provide students with supplementary reading materials in the form of core textbooks, you train teachers that are handling the core subjects, I mean, to be able to teach on math, science, social studies, and English. And anybody sits anywhere and say that that do not have an impact on the learning outcomes of students, then I'm afraid. I mean, these are people, the same people who are now criticizing the ministry and government that textbooks has not been provided at the basic school. So some way, somehow, if you underrate the significance of certain interventions like the textbooks, like the training of teachers, today we are talking about standardization of teachers, teacher professionalization. I mean, are we suggesting that, hey, all these did not have an impact on the quality of students that we are training? Government came in, the ministry for the past 4 years has recruited over 93,000 teachers. Averagely, if you divide by the number of years, which is 4 years, we are getting about 23,000 teachers per year in terms of recruitment of teachers. If you go to the training colleges, for instance, they graduate about 16,000, roughly 16,000 a year, which means the government will have to even go beyond the training colleges to the colleges, the university colleges of education, before they can get teachers to be able to augment the number. Is the suggesting that all these things, it doesn't answer the question of quality? Of course, I mean, each instances has been cited about schools that has not been doing well, especially when you go to the northern belts. Yes, it's true. But are we suggesting
that if the interventions have not been working, a school like Keta could find themselves in the final of the National Science and Maths quiz. Hold on. No, that is not in a way to disrespect them. But of course, I mean, it has. I don't want you to misconstrue it. But the point I want to try to say that this was not a first-class school. If you look at the school categorization under the Ghana Education Service, that's the point I want to say. But I'm saying that there has been some significant improvement when it comes to their learning outcomes, to the extent that it's manifested even at the level of National Science and Maths. So I'm not sure the owl is fair. don't be again. Schools like Tamale Girls, schools like Bolga Girls, schools like Tepa Senior High School. These were all schools that were not in that grade A category. But some of our last year found themselves within the best performing schools. Are we saying that all these things also happen out of a vacuum? So yes, we are not saying that those challenges are not there. No, that is far from that. We are not saying that there are still schools who are performing very low. And I think you heard the Minister of Education on the floor of Parliament. He said that he doesn't understand why in his time mathematics will have that marginal decline, and that we are going to investigate it. Of course, the solution to the improvement of learning outcomes has never been an event. It has always been a process where you investigate, of course, based on the proposal that you make. It has to be scientifically based, and then you prefer solutions to it. Today, we are looking at the national standardization test, where an intervention on literacy, on numeracy, is being proposed at the basic level. What it means is that by the time even these students go through their basic education, from primary to JHS, it means that they will have the numeracy and the literacy skills before they even get to the secondary schools. So these are all interventions that has added up, and of course, cumulatively has an impact on the learning outcomes that we are seeing. Yes, but of course, as a ministry, we admit that where there are challenges, we will go in and fix it.
Okay, we're running out of time, but I did want to say that with the National Science Quiz, you do have breakout schools. We've always had breakout schools. So, I mean, the statement about Keta, like we were saying, many of these things, we should wait until we have the data to support those statements. Then we can make those emphatically. But because we do have breakout schools, Keta could have been a breakout school, or it could have also been attributable to this. But I don't want to start
it had an impact.
That's
the intervention.
So what I would say right now, we do have to take closing remarks. So if you want what you are going to say can be included in your closing remarks, so you can start, Mr. Patti.
Very passionate to me, so I have to do this. You see, when policymakers, and he's part of the ministry, so I'll include him, when they come and then they are talking about interventions made, and they don't want to understand that interventions made are supposed to have impact, but they cannot have impact in certain schools, and other schools with the same interventions do not benefit from those impacts. Let me give you a typical example. I've been going through the districts and then the individual schools. These schools tracked me, these districts tracked me. Adansi South, in 2016-17, the pass rate for mathematics was 71.4%. English was 60.9%, 53.8% was for integrated science, and social studies was 62.3%. Now, 2019, 2020, that was when free SHS have given its first fruit. This is what the pass rate for English was. Maths was 22.7%. 2016-17, maths rate was 71.4%. After those interventions that he is talking about, the students, the pass rate for mathematics was 22.7%. English was 18.0%. Before the free SHS, English was 60.9%. Then integrated science was 8.9% in that district. Integrated science before the free SHS was 53.8%. What am I trying to say? I'm saying that you cannot pick and choose. You need to go down and do some of these studies so that you know that some of these interventions do not work in some of these schools. You do targeted intervention.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and we have to leave it there. It actually negates closing remarks, but I want to thank all of you for being on tonight's Talking Points. A very special thank you to my guest. On my far left, Mr. Peter Antipati, Executive Director of the Institute for Educational Studies, IFEST. My immediate left, Mr. Kwesi Kwarteng, the PRO of the Ministry of Education. And via Zoom, we had Mr. Kofi Asare, Executive Director of the Africa Education Board. I'm Dr. Henning Rice, and this has been Talking. Thank you so much for watching and listening. As always, good night, good luck, and as always, please be and stay safe. Till next week.